Quote, my secret, I think, to all success is naturalness and sincerity. If a girl is going to truly succeed in the world, she must be her own self. Unquote. Thousands of adventurers traveled to California to seek their fortune during the gold rush of the mid 1800s. Entertainers of all ages also came to get rich. The miners rarely saw children, and they marveled at the ones who performed. They called them fairy stars, and their favorite was Lotta Crabtree. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stone Gasman, live from New York City, and today we are going to be doing an audio commentary for the 1951 film Golden Girl, starring Mitzi Gaynor and Dale Robertson, Dennis Day, and James Barton, as well as a few other familiar faces that we'll go into. And at any rate, this is my next Mitzi Gaynor commentary after doing, I think, oh my God, I mean, how many we have left? We have 5 commentaries left. Some commentaries are going to require more research than others, and that's why they're taking a bit longer. I can definitely say I'm ready for Golden Girl. This was one of the first Mitzi Gaynor movies that I watched, and it was on one hand a disappointment, but it was on the other hand a blessing because, for one thing, I got to see Mitzi Gaynor in her prime, and she's singing and dancing her way into this lead role. And she is perfectly cast, as far as I'm concerned, as this real-life entertainer of the stage, Lotta Crabtree, in the 19th century. She became a star at the age of 8. I mean, she literally learned her dance moves from the very famous entertainer Lola Montez, who we will talk about as well. And she entertained miners during the California Gold Rush when she was, oh my God, she was, 10, 11, 12, all that. And it really wasn't until the Civil War, when that broke out in the 1860s, that she was about 16, 17 years old. And that's when this movie is taking place for Lotta Crabtree. It basically the movie only covers a couple years of her life. And even then, it doesn't cover a lot of things about her life. It covers it's weird because the producer, and we'll talk about the producer of both this and this Golden Girl and the I Don't Care Girl. They both have the same producer-director teams. These films were both produced by George Jessel and directed by Lloyd Bacon. And let's just say that they weren't really all that concerned with getting their subjects historically accurate. And they basically wrote their own stories for both of them. And in Golden Girl's case, at least this was not butchered by 20th Century Fox before release, and delayed and everything. This was released in December of 1951. And, it became, it made $1.5 million. It did fine. But it also had a very narrow audience. And we'll talk about that as we go into it. But anyway, so I am paused on 20th Century Fox Presents, and we see Mitzi Gaynor, Dale Robertson, Dennis Day, and James Barton. Now, the reason why I'm not paused on the 20th Century Fox logo for this, even though on the DVD it has the logo, the version on YouTube, which is touted as an HD version, there is no Fox logo. You just start in on the cast members, so that's what we're going to do. So why don't we go ahead and get started here? I am all ready to go. Paused on the first title card for the first sequence of Golden Girl. And we'll go ahead and press play on the count of 3, 2, 1, and play. And excuse me. I really like this title sequence, which is basically, we opened up in San Francisco. This was the the city in which a lot of a lot of Crabtree loved to live in and perform there as well. Hmm. Now, the screenplay you can see has three different screenwriters and three different people for the story. Virtually nothing that they wrote is based on a lot of Crabtree's life, but one thing I will say. Okay, yeah, I just realized down there at the bottom it says Salt Lake City. I'm not exactly sure what I mean. I'm sure that a lot of Crabtree toured through Salt Lake City at one point, but no, we're supposed to be. Okay, here we go. San Francisco, yeah. Produced by George Jessel and directed by Lloyd Bacon. We will talk about these gentlemen because, like I said, these two movies that Mitzi Gaynor, she was the star. She commanded the screen in both of these films. But the sad thing is that neither of them don't really do the subject justice. The I Don't Care Girl, which we'll talk about when we get to that, is based on Eva Tangway, the Queen of Broadway. But here, and this is an actual fountain. This is a very, in San Francisco, I believe this is actually a very famous fountain that was donated by Lotta Crabtree. And the Crabtree boarding house here we open up in California, where here we have 16-year-old Lotta Crabtree playing the piano. And here on the banjo is Gene Sheldon as Sam Jordan, who is a fictional character. And also the father here. I didn't write down the father's name. Okay. John Crabtree, the father, is played by an actor named James Barton. Now, we'll talk about all of these actors a bit later, but I think it's important to note that, of course, this is about the entertainer Lotta Crabtree. This is a book that just came out a few years ago. And granted, it was written for a young audience. It was written for basically like a elementary or middle school audience. But it does offer a perfectly it's only 100 pages. It's only about 100 pages, and it covers a lot of Crabtree's life fairly well, from when she was born. And she was born in New York City. Her father worked in a bookstore, or rather owned a bookstore, and her mother, here played by Una Merkel, was in fact a seamstress. But then there was gold in them dar hills. The California gold rush broke out. So what happened? Well, the father, John, decided to bail and just left Lotta and her mother, Mary Ann, in New York. And basically with the impression that, okay, you can just catch up with me later. And of course, he never sent any money. Yeah, of course, because he never found any gold. And, who knows what he spent, whatever money he had. But in this movie, it kind of implies that he's a gambler, when in fact there wasn't. I don't want to say there wasn't necessarily any evidence to the fact that he, was a gambler. But it is true that he did steal from Lotta Crabtree when she garnered an income, and she carried it around in a box everywhere. And he got into the box one day, even though he did get a salary. He did get a an allowance while Lotta Crabtree was performing, because it's kind of sad that he just after the California gold rush and he didn't find any gold, then he was broke. But Lotta Crabtree by that time had become a star on the stage. Now, in this movie, though, here she is, she's a teenager and she's, looking forward to Lola Montez coming into town because she really idolizes the entertainer Lola Montez, who has quite a history. I mean, even though she very famously she passed away at the age of 39. Yeah, she was very, very young. And we will get to see Lola Montez later do a whole dance number. But it is very, very true that in real life, Lola Montez actually, there she is right there in the carriage, Lola Montez, that she actually trained Lotta Crabtree. She actually taught Lotta Crabtree a lot of her dance moves and everything. And playing Lola Montez, this is an actress by the name of Carmen D'Antonio. She was a dancer whose act was usually characterized as exotic. And she had a nightclub act at the Pirates Den in Hollywood. Quote, she smears herself with oil and does such dances as to give the censors the shudders, according to a 1944 report. Her publicist staged a photograph of her bathing in, quote, strong black coffee to add to her mystique. Her other film credits include Another Thin Man, Destry Rides Again, Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, Angels Over Broadway, The Long Voyage Home, Arabian Nights, Hard Boiled Mahoney, Sirocco, World for Ransom, Maracaibo, Tank Commando, and Let No Man Write My Epitaph. And also appeared in many television programs like My Three Sons and Family Affair. She also danced on Broadway in Panama Hattie in 1940, made a number of short exotic dance films in the 1940s with titles including Jungle Drums Artist, Balnesia Artist, and Conchita Pepita in 1942. In the 1950s, she toured the United States dancing at nightclubs and casinos. Quote, she offered Hollywood a pretty and generic otherness that could authenticate its fantasies of Singapore, Arabia, or Morocco, commenting one film scholar. Now, that's Carmen D'Antonio. That's the actress who plays Lola Montez. That is not Lola Montez from the 19th century. No. We will talk about her a bit later when she does her dance. Now, the actor right here in the hat who's pointing inside in there is James Barton. I'm sorry. No. Sorry. James Barton plays the father. That's Gene Sheldon in the role of Sam Jordan. I mentioned him before. Now, when I first watched Golden Girl, I recognized Gene Sheldon immediately. And I actually had a massive smile on my face when I saw him because, and it's funny, Lloyd Bacon gives him a nice little shot there in the beginning in that first scene when he's on the banjo and everything, where he just has this massive infectious smile on his face. Well, Gene Sheldon is basically best known for playing the mute servant Bernardo in the Walt Disney version of Zorro in the 1950s with Guy Williams in the role of Zorro. I grew up with that version, even though I didn't really see every single episode until years later. But Gene Sheldon is just wonderful. It's a complete pantomime performance, and he's wonderful in that. And he doesn't have a big role here, but at the same time, when I first saw Golden Girl, I just had a massive smile on my face when I saw him because I recognized him from not only Zorro, but also Babes in Toyland. He was also in the 1961 version of Babes in Toyland with Henry Calvin, who was also in Zorro. They did Zorro and Babes in Toyland together at the same time. But his film debut was in the 1934 movie Susie's Affairs as Slug the Banjoist. So he obviously does have a history with the banjo. And so does Lotta Crabtree, which we'll get to in a bit. The next year, he had a small part in the early Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers musical Roberta, as a banjo player in the film's band. In the musical number Let's Begin, he had a short comedy scene tuning the banjo, and he danced in a comedy dance number with Fred Astaire and Candy Candido. He appeared in the Broadway review Priorities of 1942, performing a comedy banjo act in which he did not speak, wearing an outfit resembling the costume of silent film comedian Harry Langdon and mimicking some of Langdon's distinctive gestures. I can actually really see that. He also appeared in speaking roles as the Genie Alley in 20th Century Fox's 1945 films Where Do We Go From Here? And the SEAL trainer Professor Winup in The Dolly Sisters. In the 1950s and 60s, most of Sheldon's work was on various Walt Disney programs, and often seen act in the Golden Horseshoe Review episode of Walt Disney Anthology television series was as a banjo player who kept getting his fingers stuck in the strings. After several minutes, he would finally get them unstuck and play a vigorous riff on his banjo. And he also played a notorious alcoholic Puffo the Clown in Paramount's 1954 film Three Ring Circus, and in Disney's 1960 film Toby Tyler as Sam Treat, a clown and animal trainer who is one of Toby's mentors and protectors. Toby's other protector, gruff wagon driver Ben Cotter, was played by Henry Calvin, who I mentioned before, also co-starred on Zorro as Sergeant Garcia. And but he didn't make a lot of movies. As a matter of fact, I mean, Babes in Toyland was actually his very last movie. I mean, and Golden Girl is only one of about 13 movies that he did, so he doesn't have a big filmography. But here again, I was just happy to see him in this movie. Now, Cornelius is another fabrication, along with Sam Jordan, who I just talked about, played by Gene Sheldon. But Cornelius here, played by Raymond Walburn, who is actually John Crabtree's friend, and gets him to, like, you know, gamble all his money and everything, which of course is going to turn out to backfire on the entire family. But Raymond Walburn, he moved to Oakland, California, began acting on stage in the early 1900s. He performed in stock theater for only 4 years before being cast on Broadway, where he made his debut in Cordelia Blossom in 1914. Over a half century later, in 1965, Walburn acted in his final Broadway production, A Very Rich Woman. And during his long career, he also toured extensively, performing on stages throughout the United States and in other countries. Walburn did not make an impact in films until 1934, with the release of The Count of Monte Cristo, starring Robert Dunant. His filmography includes nearly 100 films, with his best-known roles as a stereotypical bumbler and as a pompous snob. He could also be villainous, as he was when he played Baron Danglars in the 1934 film version of The Count of Monte Cristo, and was a favorite of such celebrated comedy directors as Preston Sturges and Frank Capra, with whom he made several appearances. Among his films include Frank Capra's Broadway Bill from 1934, Thanks a Million, 1935, The King Steps Out, Craig's Wife, which was directed by Dorothy Arzner, one of the very few women directors in the golden age of Hollywood. In fact, practically the only one. Raymond Walburn was also in Louisiana Purchase, 1941. Hail the Conquering Hero, where he played Mayor Everett J. Noble in that classic film. And Golden Girl was his third to last movie. He only made a couple more movies after Golden Girl, including She Couldn't Say No and The Spoilers. And that was about it for Raymond Walburn's career. Now, this was probably the moment where of course, Mitzi Gaynor just owns the screen. She really, really does. She glows in this very moment. I mean, beautiful backdrop, lovely dress, including how all her arms are completely covered and everything, and a couple dogs with her. You know, just like in Bloodhounds of Broadway. Of course, in Bloodhounds of Broadway, they're actual bloodhounds. Here, they're some other breed. I really don't know. But in this scene, which is heavily reminiscent of like Snow White and the seven dwarfs, when the prince climbs over the wall when he hears the Snow White singing. Well, here Lotta Crabtree is singing, just out, you know, outside enjoying the scenery, and of course, like a siren, is bringing over this Southern gentleman, quote unquote, played by Dale Robertson, who was in Mitzi Gaynor's second movie, Take Care of My Little Girl. Now, it should be pointed out that, yes, this is Mitzi Gaynor's third movie for 20th Century Fox, her third movie in her entire filmography, actually. Her first movie was My Blue Heaven, released in 1950, December of 1950. And then Take Care of My Little Girl came out earlier in 1951. And then Golden Girl came out in December. Now, unlike My Blue Heaven and Take Care of My Little Girl, where she had maybe 15 to 20 minutes of screen time. I mean, she had a key supporting role in both those films. In Take Care of My Little Girl, she was basically, the friend that kind of was bringing Jean Crane away from the sorority and everything. And in My Blue Heaven, of course, she was doing commercials for television, and she started flirting with Dan Daly, and Betty Grable wasn't happy about that and everything. But here again, those were supporting roles. I mean, she was only on board for like 15, 20 minutes. But by that time, she had garnered so much experience in terms of dancing and in terms of singing that this seemed like a natural, give her a lead role. And in this case, of course, it's 19th century entertainer Lotta Crabtree. And Dale Robertson had actually had second billing in Take Care of My Little Girl next to Jean Crane. And just like Bloodhounds of Broadway, I mean, Mitzi has this accent, this mild accent, which of course is very charming. Now, okay, so while this scene plays out, and let me just say that Golden Girl I like Golden Girl. I do like this movie. Despite the fact that it doesn't really, it doesn't pay attention to a lot of Crabtree's story for the most part. I mean, the movie covers about 2 years, and it doesn't really do much aside from Mitzi Gaynor being in love with Dale Robertson and being constantly worried about him in the middle of the Civil War. And the movie doesn't really get into exactly what her politics are, which is kind of, I think, unnecessary. But at the same time, it's like I wanted a more complicated characterization here in terms of okay, so let me just say up front that near the end of the movie, she actually sings the song Dixie in front of, a crowd of, Northern sympathizers after the Civil War was won. And of course, naturally, they got very, very upset. Now, the circumstances of why she decides to do that is understandable in terms of the movie. But at the same time, I kind of would have wanted it's never really established as a complication in that, okay, the man she loves is a Southern gentleman. And in fact, a lot of people in San Francisco at this time were of course, supporting the Northerners, including Lotta Crabtree herself. I mean, she actually wore a Union soldier's outfit when she was doing shows. And it just seems incredible that she would decide to do, sing Dixie. But, let's go back to that later. Let's go back to that later because we got so much more about Lotta Crabtree that we have to cover here. Um, okay. And so, yeah, thanks to Miss Lois V. Harris here, I get to I'm gonna be able to get to read some stuff about Lotta Crabtree, which I think is very interesting. I mean, the first chapter, which is them going from New York to California to basically meet with her father while he's going out for gold and everything. Like they go for quite an adventure. I mean, because traveling back then wasn't easy. In fact, like I said, the author goes into like three different methods of how people traveled back then, and of course, they chose the third and the fastest way at $500, and it took about 2 to 3 months to go from New York to California. Travelers like Lotta and her mother sailed on the Atlantic Ocean to Panama in Central America, about 5,500 miles. Crossing the narrowest part of Panama could then take 10 days. In the steamy jungles, some adventurers died from yellow fever, dysentery, or typhoid. Reaching the Pacific Ocean, another ship carried them north for about 3,400 miles to San Francisco. I mean, it actually goes into a whole chapter. I mean, and the chapter, each of the chapters is only about a few pages, but yeah, it goes into a whole chapter of what she went through from New York to San Francisco, which is pretty incredible. Now here's Cornelius and the father, John Crabtree, is they're about to gamble away what the family has, which of course is going to push them to go on the road. When in fact, I mean, they started going on the road when she was, here again, a lot younger. She was, 8, 9 years old. You know. And at first, they moved to Grass Valley. When they moved into their new home, and in no time, several miners boarded with them because they had a boarding house, like here in the movie. They do one thing the movie does get right is that they did have a boarding house right here. Crabtree, when we say Crabtree, we're just referring to the father, left every day to pan for gold and didn't help Lotta's mother much. In the kitchen, Lotta killed ants and chased lizards outside while Marianne grumbled. She wasn't used to cooking for so many people. The men told her groups of traveling entertainers, including children, sometimes came to town. As in San Francisco, the ones who sang and danced were a wonder. Miners called them fairy stars, and the youngsters earned good wages. So Marianne signed Lotta up for dancing lessons. Behind Lotta's home, birds sang in the pine trees, and rabbits, squirrels, and deer darted through the tall grass. Tucked in her bed at night, Lotta listened to coyotes bark, owls hoot, and rats race across the roof. Her parents warned her not to wander too far from the house and to keep an eye out for bears. She had spotted one in the neighbor's yard. Now, this is a bear we're talking about. The bear belonged to the actress Lola Montez. Lola Montez owned a bear in real life, who kept it as a pet tied to a rope next to her home. Born in Ireland as Eliza Gilbert, Lola changed her name and pretended she came from Spain. Sometimes she spoke with an accent. Lola had toured across America and appeared in San Francisco in a play called School for Scandal, School for Scandal, where she performed for her famous spider dance. In a dress that barely covered her knees, she kicked high and shook her petticoats to get rid of imaginary spiders. I kind of wish we had seen that in this movie. You know what I'm saying? Over cups of tea, Grass Valley ladies gossiped about Lola. She smoked, had been married in Europe to a nobleman, and married again in San Francisco without getting divorced. And she showed her legs. In the 1850s, ladies hid their legs under long skirts. Marianne didn't care what others thought about Lola. She liked her. The performer was famous. She gave fancy parties and invited entertainers and the neighborhood children. At her first party at Lola's house, Lotta studied the strangers and ate candy and ice cakes. Remember, Lotta is 6 years old. She's 6 years old at this point. She listened to songs and stories, played games, and giggled. Her tiny foot also tapped to the music that was playing. The star noticed her, and a few days later she invited Lotte to come for dance lessons. Lola taught her the Scottish Highland Fling and the Spanish Fandango, as well as how to sing popular tunes before an audience and ride a horse. Lotte liked her new friend, and they rode around town and sometimes up into the rolling hills. In the summer of 1854, Marianne had a baby boy. Lotte's parents named him John after Lotte's father and called him Jack for short. 7-year-old Lotte helped care for her brother and continued taking lessons from Lola, but her father couldn't stop dreaming of finding gold. Ah, the gold. Oh, that gold. He heard of a place where he just knew he would strike it rich and declare they were moving. That's not how you. Yeah. Lotte didn't want to leave her friends Lola and their good times. Well, of course. But nevertheless, the Crabtrees soon left town. Their wagon clinked and clanged as they rode toward a distant line of snowy peaks. Crabtree said that they were the Sierra Nevada mountains, and that's where they would live. Mm-hmm. Years later, Lotte recalled those days, quote, I saw mining life the real thing. There the gold fever raged hot, and I was in the midst of it. Of course, life was rough, but I want to tell you the miners were good fellows, unquote. She went on to describe the mining camp saloon keeper, Mart Taylor, who's played by Dennis Day in this movie, who also managed the theater. He had, quote, 11 kinds of air castles packed up in his carpet bag. They toppled over as soon as he set them up. He had a knack of teaching. He got up an orchestra and led it, and when he found that I had some talent in that line, he offered to give me lessons. Despite what he thought about what would be a sure thing, Lotte's father didn't find gold in Rabbit Creek, of course. The sound of his axe splitting wood cut the chilly fall air. Quote, we were very poor, Lotte remembered. Marianne feared they would run out of money and opened another boarding house. Peddlers used mail trains to bring food, mail, and newspapers to the camp. They charged high prices for groceries, and vegetables were rarely available. Some of the men who lived with the Crabtrees often shouldered their guns and vanished into the forest to hunt deer, elk, and quail. They brought back hunks of meat for Marianne to cook. Again, a lot of this was basically completely ignored in this movie, but now here she is enjoying Lotte Crabtree's performance, and of course Dale Robertson is enjoying her reaction to her performance. But we need to talk a bit more about Lola Montez before she leaves the screen. But a very, very famous woman in history. She was an Irish dancer and actress who became famous as a Spanish dancer, courtesan, and mistress of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. Mm-hmm. At the start of the revolutions of 1848 in the German states, she was forced to flee. She proceeded to the United States via Austria, Switzerland, France, and London to return to her work as an entertainer and lecturer. And she passed away in 1861 at the age of 39. 39. That is very, very young. In 1844, Eliza, now known as Lola Montez, made a personally disappointing Parisian stage debut as a dancer in Fremantle Halévy's opera Le Lazzarone. She met and had an affair with Franz Liszt, who introduced her to the circle of George Sand. After performing in various European capitals, she settled in Paris, where she was accepted into the city's literary bohemia, becoming acquainted with Alexander Dumas, with whom she was also rumored to have had a dalliance. In Paris, she would meet Alexander Dujarrier, owner of the newspaper with the highest circulation in France and also the newspaper's drama critic. Through their romance, Montez revitalized her career as a dancer. Later on, after the two had their first quarrel over Lola's attendance at a party, Dujarrier attended the party and in a drunken state offended Jean-Baptiste Rosemond de Bouvion. When Dujarrier was challenged to a duel by de Bouvion, Dujarrier was shot and killed. In 1846, she arrived in Munich, where she was discovered by and became the mistress of King Ludwig of Bavaria. There was a rumor that when they first met, Ludwig asked her in public if her breasts were real. She soon began to use her influence on the king, and this, coupled with her arrogant manner and outbursts of temper, made her extremely unpopular with the Bavarian people. And right here in Golden Girl, she's paranoid about the money flying on the stage, worried that somebody's going to steal the money. We just saw that here. So I think the portrait of Lola Montez is pretty much on point. For more than a year, she exercised great political power, which she directed in favor of liberalism, anti-Catholicism, and in attacks against the Deschutes. Her ability to manipulate the king was so great that the Minister of State, Karl von Abel, was dismissed because he and his entire cabinet had objected to Lola being granted Bavarian nationality and the title of Countess. The students at Munich University were divided in their sympathies, and conflicts arose shortly before the outbreak of the revolutions of 1848, which led the king, at Lola's insistence, to close the university. From 1851 to 1853, Lola performed as a dancer and actress in the eastern United States, one of her offerings being a play called Lola Montez in Bavaria. In May of 1853, she arrived on the West Coast in San Francisco, where her performances created a sensation, but soon inspired a popular satire, Who's Got the Countess? She married Patrick Hull, a local newspaperman, in July and moved to Grass Valley in California in August. And that's, of course, when she met Lotta Crabtree and gave her dance lessons when she was 6 years old. In June of 1855, Lola departed the U.S. to tour Australia and resumed her career by entertaining miners at the gold diggings during the gold rush of the 1850s. And they do mention that in the movie. They do mention that she's going to Australia. She arrived in Sydney on August 16, 1855. Historian Michael Cannon claims that in September of 1855, she performed her erotic spider dance at the Theatre Royal in Melbourne, raising her skirt so high that the audience could see she wore no underclothing at all. Next day, the Argus thundered that her performance was, quote, utterly subversive to all ideals of public morality. Respectable families ceased to attend the theater, which began to show heavy losses. She earned further notoriety in Ballarat when, after reading a bad review of her performance in the Ballarat Times, she attacked the editor, Henry Seacamp, with a whip. Whoa. Although the Lola Montez polka, composed by Albert Denyon, is rumored to have been inspired by this event, the song was published in 1855, and the incident with Seacamp occurred months earlier in February of 1856. At Castlemaine in April 1856, she was, quote, rapturously encored after her spider dance in front of 400 diggers, including members of the municipal council who had adjourned their meeting early to attend the performance, but drew the wrath of the audience after insulting them following some mild heckling. She departed for San Francisco on May 22, 1856. On the return voyage, her manager was lost at sea after going overboard. In November of 1859, the Philadelphia Press reported that Lola Montez was living very quietly uptown and doesn't have much to do with the world's people. Some of her old friends, the Bohemians, now and then drop to have a little chat with her. And though she talks beautifully of her present feelings and way of life, she generally, by way of parentheses, takes out her little tobacco pouch, makes a cigarette or two for herself and a friend, and then just falls back upon old times with decided gusto and effect. She doesn't tell anybody what she's going to do. By 1860, Lola was showing the tertiary effects of syphilis, and her body began to waste away. She died at the age of 39 on January 17th, 1861. She died at the age of 39, very, very sadly. Now, there is a movie that was made in 1955, pretty much 100 years, pretty much 94 years after her death, which was directed by the same guy that did The Earrings of Madame de. I don't know why his name, Max O'Fools. Yeah, he his very last movie, which was also released on Criterion. Both of those movies, The Earrings of Madame de and Lola Montez, were both released on Criterion. And but Lola Montez is a gorgeous movie. It really is. It has Martine Carroll in the title role, and also Peter Ustinov and Anton Walbrook. And if you watch it, you need to watch it on Criterion's Blu-ray, because that is the restoration. Roger Ebert lauded the film's camera work and set design, but felt that Carol's, quote, wooden and shallow performance as the titular character prevented the film from achieving greatness. I only partially agree with him. I think that she is fine in the title role. I think the movie itself is worth seeing just because of how Max O'Fools tells the story of Lola Montez. And today it's considered one of his most revered works. Dave Kerr called it a masterpiece, wrote that, quote, certainly the story of a courtesan's life is among the most emotionally plangent, visually ravishing works the cinema has to offer. The film also received 5 votes in the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound Critics Poll. Lola Montez is acclaimed in Danny Perry's 1981 book Cult Movies as one of the most representative examples of the cult film phenomenon. So go ahead and check that out. Lola Montez by Max O'Fools. Now we're at the 36-minute mark, the 36-minute mark of Golden Girl, where the father just, gambled away everything that the family has. But of course, Mitzi Gaynor, the optimist, or Lotta Crabtree, with her optimism, looks at this as a good thing, so they can start going on the road and she can start dancing and making money through shows. So they're going to shut down the boarding house, essentially. And I really like Una Merkel as the mother too. She was somebody else that I immediately recognized because she was in another Walt Disney movie, like Gene Sheldon that I talked about earlier. Una Merkel was in The Parent Trap. She was in the original Parent Trap as Rabina, who was the housekeeper in California when Haley Mills from England went to California in that movie. But she had a long career, and she's also in My Blue Heaven, which we're going to get to very soon. Finally going to get that knocked out. But because of her strong resemblance to actress Lillian Gish, Merkel was offered a part as Gish's youngest sister in a silent film called World Shadows. However, the funding for the film dried up and it was never completed. Merkel went on to appear in a few silent movies, several of them for the Lee Bradford Corporation. She also appeared in the two-reel Love's Old Sweet Song, which was made by Lee DeForest in the phonofilm Sound on Film process and starring Louis Wolheim and Helen Weir. Not making much of a mark in films, she turned her attention to the theater, found work in several important plays on Broadway. Her biggest triumph was in Coquette, which starred her idol Helen Hayes. She invited to Hollywood by famous director D.W. Griffith to play Anne Rutledge in his film Abraham Lincoln in 1930. Merkel became a big success in sound films. During the 30s, she became a popular second lead in a number of films, usually playing the wisecracking best friend of the heroine, supporting actresses such as Jean Harlow, Carole Lombard, Loretta Young, and Eleanor Powell. On March 5th, 1945, Merkel was nearly killed when her mother, Bessie, with whom she shared an apartment in New York City, died by suicide by gassing herself. Ooh. Merkel was overcome by the 5 gas jets her mother had turned on in the kitchen, was found unconscious in her bedroom. On March 4th, 1952, 7 years almost to the day after her mother died, Merkel overdosed on sleeping pills. She was found unconscious by a nurse who was caring for her at the time and remained in a coma for a day before recovering. Wow. So yeah, this was only a few months after Golden Girl came out. Yeah, this was only a few months after Golden Girl came out. But like I said, when I was growing up, what I knew Una Merkel from was The Parent Trap. But her final film was in a Elvis Presley vehicle called Spin Out in 1966. But she was also in Destry Rides Again, as well as she played the elder daughter to the W.C. Fields character Egbert Suze in the 1940 film The Bank Dick. And in 1950, she starred with William Bendix in the baseball comedy Kill the Umpire, which was also a surprise hit. And we do see William Bendix in the Mitzi Gaynor movie For Love or Money, which was her last movie. Merkel died in LA at the age of 82 in 1986. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that she really does give Mitzi Gaynor a lot of support in this movie. And here again, even though this movie does not get, get a lot of things right from Lotta Crabtree's life and doesn't include anything substantial from her life in this movie, the point is Mitzi Gaynor and Una Merkel both make it more than watchable. I mean, Mitzi Gaynor in particular, she lives up to the title. She absolutely lives up to the title in every way. And here again, Dale Robertson, Una Merkel, Gene Sheldon, they all give tremendous support to Mitzi Gaynor in what is essentially the first movie that she's starring in. And here again, she's playing a real life entertainer, Lotta Crabtree, and but the funny thing is that George Jessel, aside from mentioning the fountain in the beginning, a lot of what we learn about her character in this is not really. I mean, could this be a representation of Lotta Crabtree that I can accept in a fictional universe? Yes. And Lotta Crabtree has only been portrayed one other time, pretty much on screen, and that was in an episode of not Gunsmoke. I knew I would get them confused. Bonanza. In Bonanza, Lotta Crabtree was played in one episode by Yvonne DiCarlo. Who was very good, although was probably about 20 years too old for the role at that point. Yeah, Mitzi's just, she's just wonderful. She, and I like Dale Robertson in this movie. I mean, here again, his character I think is more of a distraction than anything else. I mean, we want to learn more about Lotta Crabtree, and instead we spend a lot of time with her thinking about this guy, which okay, I mentioned the target audience earlier. See, the thing is that Lotta Crabtree, she died in the 1920s. She died in the early 1920s. So she had already been gone for 30 years by the time Golden Girl comes out in 1951. So who's going to remember Lotta Crabtree at that point? Probably grandmothers. And like I said, they could take their granddaughters to go see Golden Girl. Now, this is just my conjecture, I got to admit. But I think I'd be willing to bet that George Jessel, that's what exactly he was thinking when he decided to do this movie, Golden Girl, is that, okay, we're going to make a movie about Lotta Crabtree, but it's not really going to be about Lotta Crabtree. It's just going to be an excuse for Mitzi Gaynor to do a bunch of musical numbers, which, hey, look, I mean, if you're a Mitzi Gaynor fan, there's no reason to complain about that. But if you're a Lotta Crabtree fan, I can see why you would watch this and be a little bit disappointed. Now, in 1951, and here again, my conjecture about the audience being, grandmothers and granddaughters. The thing is that, of course, granddaughters would have no clue who Lotta Crabtree is. And look, the point is they can still enjoy the movie. They can still absolutely enjoy the movie and probably get attached to this story of her falling in love with this Southern gentleman, regardless of what he's doing, in terms of breaking the law, where he is in terms of politics and everything. No, it's just basically about her pining away for this guy when it should be about her career and ultimately about, what she did for people in terms of charity and everything, which is never mentioned, of course. I mean, you got to understand that this movie is essentially just showcasing a lot of Crabtree in a nutshell in terms of, yes, she was a 19th century stage entertainer. Yes, she was a revered actress, beloved essentially at that time. She enchanted the miners in the 1850s, and then during the Civil War, she did the same thing when, after the California Gold ended, there were more prospects of gold. So, what she was doing before. We're still here. Okay, good. just giving everybody in the town a little taste, a little taste, a little tease of what you're going to get when you come see Lotta Crabtree dance and sing. Now, like I said, the character of Mart Taylor, who actually did exist and was actually Lotta's dancing instructor for a few years, did actually go out on the road with them. In no time at all, Mart led them away from Rabbit Creek and onto a narrow forest trail. They all rode mules, and Marianne carried Jack. We used to put up in little camps. Lotta remembered where we gave performances in a tent or a cabin. She danced on barrel tops, pool tables, or rough plank floors. Now, reminder, she's 8 years old at this time. Just a reminder. Sometimes Mart built a platform for her by nailing boards to supports. He also made a curtain by rigging a rope across the room and hanging blankets on it. Through the spring and summer, they traveled to mining camps and towns, but when they reached Northern California, Lotta learned that her mother could not go on. She was going to have another baby. Marianne sent Jack with Mart to San Francisco, a journey of 200 miles. The toddler would stay with Lotta's aunt, who had recently moved there. Marianne made arrangements with a pioneer family in Eureka, a city on the Pacific Ocean, to care for Lotta. She told Lotta she must stay with them for a while and she would come for her in a few weeks. Lotta cried and pleaded she didn't want to leave her mother and live with people she didn't know. Well, perfectly understandable. And in this movie, she does cry, but she does cry for Dale Robertson's character. And, I don't know. I if she's going to cry on screen, I think it would have been a little bit more interesting and, moving if she was crying because she didn't know if she was going to see her mother again, giving birth and everything. But when a stranger arrived with 2 horses, Lotta clung to her mother before finally kissing her goodbye. The man helped her climb on the back of a horse and led her into the damp, dark forest. Ooh. On the trail, large trees surrounded them, and green ferns, brown needles, and cones carpeted the ground. Now and then a shaft of sunlight pierced the dim light. Lotta, who was now 9 years old, patted her horse's soft hair as he jogged along. Looking up, she caught her breath. High above stretched the straightest, tallest trees she'd ever seen. Her guide said they were redwood trees and more than 900 years old. Lotta had never heard of anything that old. She wished her mama could see them. A thickening fog wrapped around them, and Lotta wondered when she would see her eyes filled with tears. See, I mean, I just kind of wish I had seen this on the screen rather than, her crying in her dressing room over some southern guy. Just saying. Just saying. Miles later, the fog thinned and they rode out of the trees. The horses broke into a trot on a road that wound along a bay and into Eureka, a city of churches, homes, and shops. Lotta smelled something sweet in the air as they passed a large building. Her guide said it was a mill where they sawed redwood logs into lumber. Before long, he called out, "Whoa there!" and pulled up on his horse's reins in front of a large house. He lifted Lotta down from the horse as the front door opened, and the Ryan family welcomed Lotta, and in no time she was playing games with their children. Years later, they remembered when she danced and sang songs for them, made them laugh, In one tune, Lotta mimicked the way someone from England talked. She changed the sound of the lyrics and twanged, "I've a howl in my heart, big enough to roll a cabbage around in." After a few weeks, Marianne arrived with Lotta's new brother, George. Lotta hugged her mother long and tight and held the baby. When Lotta's mama said her papa would meet them in San Francisco, Lotta couldn't stop smiling. Marianne told her that the potholes, ruts, and mud marked the roads through the forest to the city, so she had booked passage for them on a ship. They said goodbye to the Ryans and sailed south on the Pacific Ocean. Lotta helped her mama care for the baby during the voyage. 2 days later, they landed in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier about Lotta playing the banjo. Lotta was one of the first female banjo pickers on the stage. Men said that the banjo was not an instrument for women. Okay. In fact, at the time, banjos were usually played by African American men. In Shasta, California, Lotta's troupe met at a popular minstrel show touring group from San Francisco. And it is true that Lotta did perform in blackface and did Little Topsy's song from Uncle Tom's Cabin. Lotta's troupe continued on their tour of Northern California, and she kept adding more to her regular act. An actress showed her how to mime or use gestures for no words. She rolled her eyes, twisted her face, and winked when she told jokes, too. When she tried her new skills on stage, the miners laughed, she giggled, and they whooped. Until then, only men performed comedy. Actresses didn't want to risk their ladylike reputations. 9-year-old Lotta Crabtree became the very first female comedian, at least according to the author. Before every show, Lotta poked her curly red head out from behind the curtain and grinned at the audience, who responded with laughter and cheers. Little Lotta had them in the palm of her hand. Towards the end of the show, she changed from her leprechaun costume into a pretty dress with puffy sleeves and sang songs like "Dear Mother, I'll Come Home Again." Tears filled the homesick men's eyes. They cheered and applauded, usually tossing money and gold around her tiny feet. But if the miners were down on their luck, or if another group entertained nearby, Lotta's troupe earned little. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So we are coming up on the 53-minute mark. The 53-minute mark of Golden Girls. So we're almost halfway through. We're almost halfway through here. We've already seen Mitzi Gaynor do a number of dance numbers and everything. And of course, Dale Robertson is following every step of the way, watching Lotta do her thing. Let's see. Now, the actor that plays Mart Taylor in this film, and by the way, this film did get one Oscar nomination for a song that Dennis Day sings on the stage much later. Yeah, oddly enough, this film only got one Oscar nomination for a song that Mitzi Gaynor doesn't even sing. Very oddly enough. But he was a singer of Irish descent. Born and raised in the Throgs Neck, Clayson Point section of the Bronx. In 1939, Gene McNulty, as Day was then known, sang on network radio with band leader Larry Clinton. The Clinton broadcasts were aimed at the collegiate audience and were often broadcast from a college campus. The 23-year-old McNulty won an audience poll as a favorite vocalist. Day appeared for the first time on Jack Benny's radio show on October 8, 1939, taking the place of another tenor, Kenny Baker. He remained associated with Benny's radio and television programs until Benny's death in 1974. He was introduced with actress Verna Felton playing his overbearing mother as a 19-year-old naive boy singer, a character he kept through his whole career. Mary Livingstone, Benny's wife, brought the singer to Benny's attention after hearing Day on the radio during a visit to New York. She took a recording of Day's singing voice to Benny, who then went to New York to audition Day. The audition resulted in Day's role in the Benny program. Day's first recorded song was, quote, "Good Night, My Beautiful." Besides singing, Day was a mimic. On the Benny program, Day performed impressions of various celebrities of the era, including Ronald Colman, Jimmy Durante, and James Stewart. From 1944 to 46, he served in the U.S. Navy as lieutenant. Awesome. While in service, he was temporarily replaced on the Benny radio program by fellow tenor Larry Stevens. On his return to civilian life, he continued his work with Benny while also starring on his own NBC show, A Day in the Life of Dennis Day. Excuse me. On the NBC show, A Day in the Life of Dennis Day. On Benny's show, Day's having two programs in comparison to Benny's one was the subject of numerous jokes and gags, usually revolving around Day rubbing Benny's and sometimes other cast members and guest stars' noses. In that fact, his last radio series was a comedy and variety show that aired on NBC's Sunday afternoon schedule during the 54-55 season. When Day got his own radio sitcom, he continued to play essentially the same character that he originated on Benny's program. For this series, though, Day lived in the fictional town of Weaverville, stayed at a boarding house run by Clara Anderson, usually played by Bea Benaderet. Her henpecked husband, Herbert Anderson, was portrayed by Dink Trout. Day was engaged to their daughter Mildred, played by Barbara Eiler. His character worked at Willoughby's drugstore, where his boss was Mr. Willoughby. Okay. The show was sponsored by Colgate Palmolive. Vernon Smith was the announcer, while music was provided by Bud Dant and his orchestra. The format of the show began with a song by Day, followed by the first half of the plot, a second song by Day, the rest of the plot, and then a third song by Day to finish the episode. Episodes can be heard regularly on the Sirius XM Radio Classics channel. Eventually, his own television series, The Dennis Day Show, was first telecast on NBC on February 8th, 1952, and then in the 1953-54 season. Between 52 and 1978, Day made numerous TV appearances as a singer and actor and voice for animation. Appeared as the mystery guest on the January 23rd, 1955 episode of What's My Line. Day was correctly identified by panelist Dorothy Kilgallen. In 1957, Day played himself in episode 7, season 2 of the briefly aired situation comedy Date with the Angels, in which on the way to a recording studio, Day's car breaks down in front of Vicky's Angel's home. Vicky Angel, played by Betty White, of all people. While waiting for the automobile service to arrive, he does a few imitations, including Elvis, sings a song, and does a duet with Betty White. The episode, which began in Sardi's restaurant, included brief appearances of Liberace and Hugh O'Brien. While numerous stars appeared in the series without credit, all three, Day, Liberace, and O'Brien, guest stars appear in the credits on that episode. In 1976, Day was the voice of Parson Brown in the Rankin Bass production Frosty's Winter Wonderland, and again worked with them in 1978 when he voiced Fred in The Stingiest Man in Town, which was their animated version of Charles Dickens's novel A Christmas Carol. Other films he did include Buck Benny Rides Again, Sleepy Lagoon, Music in Manhattan, The Girl Next Door, and Wonton Ton, The Dog Who Saved Hollywood, as a singing telegraph man. For the soundtrack of My Wild Irish Rose, a biopic about Chauncey Olcott, Day provided the singing voice to the acting of Dennis Morgan. Day also provided the voices of Johnny Appleseed, Johnny's Angel, and the Old Settler in the Johnny Appleseed segment in Walt Disney's 1948 feature Melody Time. He died in 1988 of Lou Gehrig's disease at the age of 72. Yep. That's Dennis Day in the role of Mart Taylor. Now, we're not going to see the father again until the end, so I'll wait until then to talk about the father. She refuses to go on stage unless she sees unless she sees Tom Richmond. Now, I thought that Golden Girl came out in December of 1951, but apparently it came out November 1st. Yeah, it came out November 1st, 1951, and made $1.5 million. Oh, okay. Now, let's talk about George Jessel, the producer. Now, like I said, George Jessel and Lloyd Bacon were both the producer and director, respectively, of both Golden Girl and The I Don't Care Girl. Now, with The I Don't Care Girl, I was basically just going to talk about Eva Tangway uh, throughout its 78-minute runtime. So let me go ahead and talk about George Jessel right now. He was an American actor, singer, songwriter, and film producer, and he was famous in his lifetime as a multi-talented comedic entertainer, achieving a level of recognition that transcended his limited roles in movies. He was widely known by his nickname, the Toastmaster General of the United States, for his frequent role as the master of ceremonies of political and entertainment gatherings. Jessel originated the title role in the stage production of The Jazz Singer. His most famous comedy skit was called Hello Mama or Phone Call from Mama, which portrayed a one-sided telephone conversation. In 1919, he produced his own solo show, George Jessel's Troubles. Jessel co-wrote the lyrics for a hit tune, Oh, How I Laugh When I Think How I Cried About You, and he performed in several successful comedy stage shows in the early 20s. In 1921, he recorded a hit single, The Toastmaster, and he appeared in his first motion picture, the silent movie The Other Man's Wife, in 1919. In 1924, he appeared in a brief comedy sketch in a short film made in the DeForest Phonofilm Sound on Film process. So remember, this is the producer. He started out as an actor. In 1925, he emerged as one of the most popular leading men on Broadway with a starring role in the stage production of The Jazz Singer. The success of the show prompted Warner Brothers, after their success with Don Juan in 1926, with music and sound effects only, to adapt The Jazz Singer as their first talkie, with dialogue in to cast Jessel in the lead role. However, the studio refused his salary demands, so Jessel turned down the movie role, which was eventually played by Al Jolson, of course. According to Jessel, during an interview around 1980, Warner Brothers still owed Jessel money for earlier roles and lacked enough funds to produce his movie with a leading star. Jolson, the biographical inspiration for the movie, became the movie's main financial backer. Jessel's next movie role was in Private Izzy Murphy, whereas Jolson's film career skyrocketed after the 1927 release of The Jazz Singer. Jessel remained in smaller movie roles, often intended for audiences fond of Jewish and other ethnic humor. He was elected to the Lambs Theater Club in 1942. In the middle of the 1940s, he began producing musicals at 20th Century Fox, producing 24 films in a career that lasted through the 1950s and 60s. At the same time, he became known as a host on the banquet circuit, famous for his good-natured wit aimed at his fellow celebrities. In 1946, he was one of the founding members of the California branch of the Friars Club. A recording exists of an example of his blue work in front of a stag audience, although it was actually recorded as a roast hosted by the Friars' rival, the Masquers Club. He also traveled widely overseas with the USO entertaining troops. As he grew older, he wrote eulogies for many of his contemporaries in Hollywood. He wrote 3 volumes of memoirs. Jessel produced a number of Hollywood films, including Dolly Sisters, Nightmare Alley, 1946, Golden Girl, and The I Don't Care Girl. And I, in fact, do own a copy of the original Nightmare Alley, which George Jessel had produced. And of course, Guillermo del Toro just did an excellent remake just a few years ago. And that is easily George Jessel's best film in terms of his producing career. That's definitely his best movie, no question. His later film roles included a cameo as himself in Valley of the Dolls, The Busybody opposite Sid Caesar, and the controversial musical Can Hieronymus Merkin Ever Forget Mercy, Hump, and Find True Happiness, directed by and starring Anthony Newley. He made additional cameos in other all-star films such as The Finks, 1970, and Wonton Ton, The Dog Who Saved Hollywood. 1976. Jessel was included on one of the witnesses interviewed in the 1981 film Reds by Warren Beatty to gain perspective on the lives of Jack Reed and Louise Bryant, the two protagonists of the movie. Beatty began filming the witnesses as early as 1971. And Jessel died in 1981 at the age of 83. So, and although he did have a film role in The Other Side of the Wind, which was the Orson Welles movie that finally got a release after being in production for 48 years or something like that. But yeah, I mean, he was also master of ceremonies in Four Jills and a Jeep. So yeah, he only produced he didn't produce a lot of movies, but he did produce two of Mitzi Gaynor's movies. And here again, it just didn't seem like he was that concerned with the actual history of both of these stage entertainers, and just and especially with the I Don't Care Girl, which is basically, he actually has a cameo as himself in the movie, taking pitches from people about who Eva Tangway really was and everything. Well, I don't think that happened with Lotta Crabtree. I mean, like I said, she had already been gone for 30 years when Golden Girl came out in 1951. And just to let everybody know, we are now at the 1 hour and 6 minute mark. 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 40 seconds. So we have about 41 minutes to go. Roughly about 41 minutes to go. I mean, as much as I do like this movie, another problem with the movie is that it's too long. It takes us way too long before we get actually out on the road when Lotta is doing all these shows in all these mining towns. I mean, we don't leave until the 40-minute mark. It would have been better if we left by the 30-minute mark. I mean, and that's the thing, is that even though I shouldn't complain that this film is too long, because at least it wasn't butchered by the editors, unlike the I Don't Care Girl, which was absolutely butchered down to 78 minutes, where there's barely a story in there. Here, at least there's a story. At least the story gets played out. There's not much about Lotta Crabtree herself in real life that's in this movie, but at the same time, at least she's given a story. At least she's given, this is the only film that was ever made about Lotta Crabtree. And believe me, I really wish that it had focused more on her actual history. But in compensation, we have a wonderful Mitzi Gaynor performance, even though we don't have that much history. Now, let's see. Okay, I wanted to mention that in addition to this book, which this book came out in 2017, by the way, and here again, it provides an excellent overview of her life, even though it was written for a young audience. Now, alternatively, a couple years ago, we had another book come out called Living in a Star's Light, a novel based on the life of Miss Lotta Crabtree, which is actually very interesting, because this is actually told from the point of view of a guy, Walter Kane, who happens to be Lotta Crabtree's biggest fan. And so when they were very young, when they were kids, 6 or 7, Lotta went out fishing with them. And she explained that she almost never is able to go out with other kids her own age, because of course she's busy learning her dance moves and everything. I mean, like I said, pretty much 8-9 years old right after she starts learning everything. And we get to know Lotta Crabtree through this guy, right? He falls in love with a prostitute. The prostitute gets sold and beaten by somebody else. Then he goes to Lotta Crabtree for help. So Lotta's mother buys the prostitute's contract. Yes, this all actually happens. And so to pay off this debt, he's going to work for Lotta Crabtree for like the next 5 years. That's what this book is about. Living in a star's light, where he and this prostitute that he likes and he wants to eventually marry, and he does eventually marry, they are living with Lotta Crabtree under her protection, her and Mary Ann's protection. And I gotta say, I mean, especially as as a supplement to this book, which was written for a youth audience, this book, on the other hand, is actually very, very interesting. It's a quick read. I'm pretty certain that the author of this book is a Lotta Crabtree fan, and he just didn't want to release the traditional biography that you normally see when it comes to these type of entertainers. So, I mean, that's why I liked what he did with this book. I really did. And I was going to actually just read a portion here, probably just the opening. And then there's a segment later in the book that I want to cover too. But this is how he just opens up this book, because I don't want to give away anything else for anybody that wants to buy this. But just check this out real quick. Chapter 1, Dancing and Fishing. Little Lotta Crabtree spun on the stage in Mark Taylor's saloon, her hair flying out, her toes tapping, and her legs crossing and uncrossing faster than a hummingbird's wings. Excuse me. She modified her dance a bit by flipping her skirt with her hands as well as her legs, the white frills of her bloomers covering her calves and knees. Her shoes click-clacked loudly on the wood, her dance a traditional leggy jig to an old Irish tune. She had about a year over Walter Kane's 5 1/2. He stood close to the edge of the stage, staring like he was watching lightning. Lotta's dark green dress had a long skirt with white stripes running up and down. She wore a top with short, puffy sleeves and a loose neckline, showing off her pale white shoulders and arms. Her body was thin, while her face was round. Her dark red shoulder-length curls bounced when she moved. Walter hadn't met many girls his own age, since there were few children and living in the gold camps. But today, Lotta was here, the prettiest girl he'd ever seen. So that's what makes this book very, very interesting, in terms of we learn about Lotta Crabtree through this this guy who grew up to be her biggest fan, right? And he does supply a note at the end, which I wanted to cover here real quick instead of just reading more of the book. My goal in writing Living in a Star's Light was to mix real and fictional characters while creating an intriguing narrative and remaining faithful to the history of Lotta Crabtree. Historical fiction can be more accurate in portraying past events than nonfiction, because all people are greater than listing of their accomplishments. Their thoughts and feelings are presented as they come to life, but they always have to fit with the actions of the real characters. Indeed. A good example of this is Lotta's friendship with Tabby, a fictional character. Tabby is the prostitute I mentioned earlier. During the gold rush, the population of San Francisco grew rapidly and changed in demographics. The number of Native Americans decreased, while the number of men of European descent increased. These men were mostly prospectors who were either single or had left their families to search for gold, like John Crabtree. Yes, indeed. There were many more men than women. It's also true that the women who came on their own were mostly sex workers, and the brothels where those women worked were often saloons. Although there is no evidence Lotta Crabtree had a friend who was a prostitute, it is reasonable to assume Lotta, who often sang at saloons, met women who worked there. Mm-hmm. It is also true that Lotta never forgot the struggles of her early years, and not only felt compassion towards the poor, but identified with them. Throughout her career, she played the waif, sometimes a boy, sometimes a girl. She was short, so it was easy for her to carry off those roles, even in the latter part of her career. She also gave money to charities that helped the poor, especially young boys who made meager salaries delivering newspapers. In addition to her benevolence during her life, she included the same charities in her will. It is not unreasonable to think that she would help her friend, Tabby, if it was in her power to do so. And one of the major historical events in Lotta Crabtree's life that he does cover in this book is when Lotta Crabtree got injured at the age of 43, which basically ended her stage career at that point. That was, I mean, you got to remember, she had been on the stage dancing for, close to 40 years at that point, and she was 44. She had been on the stage doing all that for 40 years. That's insane to think about. But no, I mean, she had an injury. She had a leg injury, which basically she after that she had to retire from the stage. And she knew that doing all that intense dancing for nearly 40 years eventually was going to catch up with her. So that's when she retired. Hey Jay, how you doing? It's great to see you, sir. Great to see you. We are 1 hour and 16 minutes, 1 hour and 16 minutes and 15 seconds into Golden Girl. We have about 30 minutes left to go. And he does include other people that actually knew Lotta Crabtree in real life in this book. Like Ada Menken was a real performer who knew Lotta. She did appear in a show riding a horse across the stage while wearing a bodysuit that made her appear naked. Oh, it was a scandal at the time. It's also true that Ada Menken was a friend of Lotta's and often went riding with her, fully dressed, of course. The other theater personalities I mentioned are all real. Jenny Lind, Clifton Taylor, and John Brogum, among others. Minnie Palmer was also real and did try to become the European Lotta by copying Lotta's routines. In both of these books, Minnie Palmer is mentioned and discussed as somebody who basically just ripped off all of Lotta Crabtree's dance routines and was her biggest rival for a while in the 1870s. Lotta's plays, which I mentioned in the story, were all real, including The Pet of the Petticoats, Family Jars, The Firefly, Musette, Little Nell, and The Marchioness, and any others I listed. Lotta's performance at Temple Square in Salt Lake City was real, and she did meet Brigham Young. Some sources reported that he was interested in marrying her, but I can't confirm that this was true. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Thomas Hill was a real artist who lived in Massachusetts and went to San Francisco to paint landscapes. I did not find a record that Lotta ever met him or saw his work, but her interest in art is a fact. Lotta never married, but had many suitors. Bolton Holm and the Grand Duke Alexis of Russia were among them. The facts, including Bolton's death and the time Lotta spent on the yacht provided to the Grand Duke by the American government, are real. Lotta Crabtree spent her childhood moving from mining camp to mining camp with a troupe of actors. With no friends her own age, Lotta must have been very lonely. But she was a strong child and grew into a strong woman. She found happiness in dance and music, loving the stage and loving her mother. All very true. Her life was important to the people around her and to the people who followed in her footsteps, and I hope I've done justice to her memory. And you know what? Even though I do think that this book does justice to her memory, even though it is fictional, and in its own small way, Golden Girl does the same thing. I don't think that here again. I wish more of the real Lotta Crabtree was in the movie. Of course, I'm not going to repeat myself on that, but at the same time, it's that frustration that is keeping me from ranking this movie very high on my Mitzi Gaynor list. As good as she is in this movie, and she is a delight. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the actor who plays John Crabtree, her father, in this movie. James Barton is his name. He was born into a theatrical family on November 1st, 1890. Also, he was born on the same day that Golden Girl came out in 1951 on his birthday. Oh, interesting. He began performing in minstrel shows and burlesque houses throughout the country in 1898. His years of experience working with African American performers led to his becoming one of the first jazz dancers in America. Oh, wow. After working with repertory companies in South and the Midwest, he made his Broadway debut in the musical review The Passing Show of 1919 in a role originally intended for Ed Wynn. He frequently was the highlight of an otherwise mediocre productions, and a critic for the Daily News noted, whenever the book failed him, he shuffled into one or more of his eccentric dances. Barton's other theater credits include Sweet and Low in 1930, Tobacco Road 1933, Bright Lights of 1944, The Iceman Cometh 1946, and Paint Your Wagon in 1951. Barton's film career was also concurrent to his stage performances, began in the silent era in 1923, also appeared in a number of Paramount Pictures short subjects in 1929. Bing Crosby considered James Barton to be one of his 10 favorite performers of all time, alongside such names as Al Jolson, Frank Sinatra, Lena Horne, Judy Garland, and Nat King Cole. Sammy Kahn has stated that he considered Barton to be the greatest entertainer. If there was a decathlon for performing, James Barton would win, going away, and cherished the St. Genius's medal he was given by Barton's widow above his Academy Awards. Barton died of a heart attack at Nassau Hospital in New York on February 19th, 1962, at the age of 71. Yeah, and his first movie was Why Women Remarry in 1923, but he was also in The Shepherd of the Hills, The Time of Your Life, Yellow Sky, The Daughter of Rosie O'Grady, Here Comes the Groom, The Naked Hills, and his last movie, believe it or not, was The Misfits, which was also the last movie for Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable, where James Barton plays Fletcher's grandfather. Yeah, that was his last movie, and yeah. Hey, Cliff, how you doing? I'm glad you're enjoying the commentary. Glad you're enjoying the commentary, sir. Yeah, I take my time in preparing for these commentaries, and I had to read this book, and then I read this book. I mean, it's insane. But yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it, sir. Very glad you're enjoying it. Now we are 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 30 seconds. And I believe we're about to hear the song that was nominated for an Academy Award, which, like I said, was pretty much sung just by Dennis Day right here. As we are back in San Francisco. But, a lot of Crabtree, she, when she first went to New York, she, unfortunately, her New York debut did not go well. And so eventually she had to go to Chicago and everything. Yeah, this is the song Never that was nominated for an Academy Award. The only nomination that Golden Girl got. And a lot of Crabtree's later years were basically just traveling, seeing the world, but she was also a massive benefactor and gave to a lot of charities. And I was going to talk about the fountain that I mentioned, that they mentioned in the beginning of the movie. In fact, the narrator was actually the producer George Jessel. Sorry, these pages are tough to. In 1875, Lotta thanked San Franciscans by helping make her a success by sending them a $10,000 fancy bronze cast iron drinking fountain. The bronze surface glowed like a new copper penny. The 21-foot structure held 4 basins on the side. Black tin cups hung nearby on a chain. Below them, 2 smaller containers provided water for thirsty dogs and horses. City leaders placed Lotta's fountain on busy Market Street. 2 years later, Lotta stopped the fountain while she was on a Western tour. She sipped a drink of water, smiled, and waved to onlookers before stepping into her carriage and traveling into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Marianne bought a gold mine, and she and Lotta visited Rabbit Creek. Lotta fondly remembered living there when she was 8. She thought back on her dancing lessons with Mark Taylor and her debut before the miners in the small log cabin theater. Now she entertained in magnificent theaters for thousands of people at the time. Let's see. Just double checking my notes here real quick. I think I've covered all this. And we're going to be singing soon When Johnny Comes Marching Home. But wow. Now, let me talk about the DVD real quick. Because, okay, I'm watching this on YouTube. However, there was, in fact, a DVD version of this movie put out. However, I must say that it is not worth picking up. Even if you're a fan of the movie, it's not really worth picking up because this was released on, as you can see, the 20th Century Fox Cinema Archives line. And this is basically the same thing as like the Vault series from Universal, and Columbia Pictures has that line too, where they put out these lesser known obsolete titles on a video on a VOD disc, and the picture quality is atrocious. On Golden Girl, at least, it's atrocious. Look, it got so bad with these discs that DVD Talk even rejected all of these DVDs and said, no, we're not going to review these. It's the 2010s. I mean, you should be showing more respect for these movies, even if you're only putting out a limited supply with no bonus features and no proper restoration whatsoever. This one looks like at least it was cleaned up a bit. But on DVD, the copy of Golden Girl is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I mean, it was basically just ignored. It was basically ignored, and it was, a pretty basic transfer with no bells and whistles whatsoever. I mean, the color is way off. It's just, I mean, the HD print on YouTube is, I believe, a TCM print, and it looks substantially better instead of this DVD. And also the I Don't Care Girl got the same treatment. And my question is, why couldn't Golden Girl and the I Don't Care Girl, why couldn't they have gotten these marquee musical treatments? I think that's a very valid question. I mean, granted, these are two of Mitzi Gaynor's best movies, and, they were both given wonderful DVDs by 20th Century Fox with bonus features and with beautiful prints on top of all that. These Cinema Archive discs, though, are just awful. They are absolutely awful. Stay away from them as much as you can. I mean, honestly, I don't even know if I want to give this away because the copy on the disc is so terrible that, I mean, if I'm going to watch this movie, I'll just watch it on YouTube because, Wonderful dance number with James Barton here. And here again, like with the I Don't Care Girl, when Mitzi Gaynor is on stage, no complaints whatsoever. I mean, you almost forget about the fact that Lotta Crabtree was a real person, and you just focus on Mitzi Gaynor just doing her act, which is wonderful. And here again, tremendous support by her supporting cast here. I don't believe this movie was ever released on VHS. And it only has, over at imdb.com, it only has 15 reviews. something like that. I mean, it's the movie is now fairly obscure. It's now fairly obscure. Not, I mean, I don't think many people remember it. But there's only 15 user reviews over at IMDb. A lot of them are very positive. 7 out of 10, Mitzi stars in musical Virginia City. 10 out of 10, praise for a good musical. 7 out of 10, worth watching if you like Mitzi. Mitzi gets to strut her stuff in this almost wholly fictional biography. The actual story of Lotta's life, touring mining camps, forging what became early American theater in the West, and becoming a major philanthropist, was far more interesting than the surface collection of period inappropriate musical numbers tied tenaciously to a silly love story that never happened and makes Lotta seem foolish and naive. Thank you. 100%. And yet they're still positive. They gave it a 7 out of 10. But I still agreed with everything they just said. Mitzi was a fantastic dancer, and a pert personality, and those two traits are much in evidence throughout the film. So if you like her, you'll like this. There is also the wonderful Una Merkel as Lotta's mother, adding a bit of dash to the proceedings. But she's the only member of the supporting cast that makes any impression. A colorful movie, but worthless as if you're interested in Miss Crabtree's story. Yeah. I couldn't have said it any better myself, to be perfectly honest. Oh, I like this. 10 out of 10. Love this movie. I saw this movie back when I was a young teenage girl of about 13 years, and it has stuck in my memory for 50 years. Wow. It was sort of a Cinderella story to me in its purest form. I would love to own this movie to let my grandchildren watch it, as I feel they would really get something from it. Movies today just don't compare, in my opinion. The stars, both Mitzi Gaynor and Dale Robertson, were superb. Her songs and dances were wonderful, and the acting was of the best quality. That was written back in 2005. 7 out of 10, typical 50s Fox musical. 6 out of 10, all the right talent. 7 out of 10, enjoyable post-bellum musical. 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, the most golden of Golden Girls, Mitzi Gaynor. Like I said, she does live up to the title. Say what you will, she does live up to the title. 8 out of 10, 3 out of 10, Fox contract musical, Strictly by the Numbers, written by my friend John, Moonspinner55. Let's see. 6 out of 10, interesting curiosity. 6 out of 10, a good musical with a lot of historical mistakes. 6 out of 10, young Mitzi. And 10 out of 10, beautiful, talented Mitzi. Yes, yes, indeed. And as far as external reviews, there's only one. There's only one. And that is by Jessica Pickens over at Comet Over Hollywood. Golden Girl is a fun film, and Mitzi Gaynor gives an energetic performance. When the film started, I thought I would be annoyed with Dennis Day and his character, but I was pleasantly surprised. He gives a good performance, sings beautifully, and was really likable. Dale Robertson was also handsome and likable as Gaynor's love interest. And I think it also goes without saying that Una Merkel and James Barton, who play a lot as parents, stole the show. I watched Golden Girl and another Gaynor biopic, The I Don't Care Girl, back to back. If you remember, the latter was lackluster, but Golden Girl was a breath of fresh air, left me smiling and humming, "Oh, them golden slippers." Yeah, you're going to have to get used to that song, "Oh, them golden slippers," because we hear it like 6 times in the movie. But see, that's the thing. I mean, even when you don't think of Lotta Crabtree, you just enjoy Mitzi dancing and singing and smiling. Like I said, triple threat. And like I said, 20th Century Fox was the perfect training ground for her, as well as Broadway, because like I said, she was on the stage long before she did movies. But here again, why George Jessel, decided to ignore the two subjects that he was making movies about, I just don't understand. but I can only imagine he was only thinking of the target audience. Now, well, I mean, I'm not gonna talk anymore about the "I Don't Care" girl until we do the commentary for that. But we're about to come up on a massive historical discrepancy, which let me put it this way: I can imagine that there might have been some maybe a few audience members in 1951 that would have said, "Oh, Lotto would have never done that," and we're coming up on that moment, which at first I didn't like it, but then I was okay with it after I thought about it. I mean, it's really weird, but she sings this Southern song called Dixie because she thinks that Dale Robertson has been killed, or oh no, has died. She thinks she's waiting on him to return and everything, and when she hears that he's probably dead, she decides to go out there and sings Dixie in his honor because he came from the South. Now, I kind of wish that there was a setup to that. And what I mean by that is this. Like, I wish that, like I said, there was a lot more conflict. Like maybe Mitzi being under pressure not to date this guy because he's a Southerner. And of course, she does, songs that support the Northern Army and everything. But I just kind of wish that they had set everything up with her in that Union outfit, like in real life. Hmm. So the last portion of the movie, I mean, we're coming up on 1 hour and 37 minutes. 1 hour and 37 minutes. So we got only about 10 minutes left to go. And yeah, the most important thing I wanted to talk about was the Union uniform. Okay. Most residents in San Francisco sided with Northerners and wanted the Union soldiers to win the war. Performers pleased their audiences by singing or playing lively songs showing their loyalty to the North. Mary Ann sewed a blue soldier's uniform like the Union Army's. Lotta, age 14, wore the costume during a new act in which she played a drum and a hornpipe and sang songs praising the nation. People leaped from their theater seats and marched in the aisles to her music. There she is in her Union outfit right there. Yep, that's the real Lotta Crabtree right there. At about the same time, talk of new gold and silver discoveries electrified the city. Miners in California's camps rushed east on rugged mountain trails from Nevada territory. Lotta and her mama waved goodbye to her brothers in Crabtree. They piled into a stagecoach with 5 other musicians and singers, and the troop followed the fortune hunters to Virginia City, Nevada. As the crowded stagecoach bounced along, Lotta enjoyed the entertainers' jokes and stories. She had worked with all the men. Jake Wallace, her banjo teacher, managed the troop and drove their stagecoach. He remembered one incident after heavy rains flooded the rivers and streams. At the raging American River, the horses galloped across a bridge. With a loud thud, the bridge shook. Jake heard grinding and held the reins tight. Lotta stuck her head out the window and shouted over the roaring water, "Stay with them, Jake, stay with them." The horses reached the road and everyone looked back and gasped. The bridge had turned over and tumbled downstream. The company continued on into the forests of Northern California. During their shows, folks shouted approval and applauded after Jake sang a tune about the United States. When Lotta performed her act in her blue Union soldier costume, audiences stood and cheered. The troupe rolled on through timberland and into southern Oregon and opened their show in a theater in Roseburg. After each patriotic song, the crowd mumbled, snickered, and snorted, growing louder every time. The miners were from the South. Lotta was not intimidated. She thrummed her drum and began. Her clear voice carried to the back of the theater, over raising hisses and hoots as she sang the rousing song, Rally Around the Flag. It was also called the Battle Cry of Freedom and was written by George F. Root in 1862. The chorus follows, The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah, down with the traitor, up with the star. While we rally around the flag, boys rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Jake called to Lotta to change her costume and cancel the soldier act. They could be mobbed. She raised her chin and said she was for the North and would, quote, give it even if they hanged her that night, unquote. 15-year-old Lotta continued performing. Jake said she faced a cold and relentless audience and they never gave her a hand. When she finished, no shower of gold and money fell on the stage. The curtain dropped and the cast dashed out to the door, jumped into their waiting stagecoach and raced out of Roseburg. She was a little mite of a thing, but she had sand and ginger in her enough for a dozen people. Yep, that actually happened. And in a sense, it's kind of... it is kind of a weird reflection of what's going on right here in the movie when she sings Dixie, and she really upsets this audience who, of course, we're just celebrating the end of the war with all these songs, but now you got to sing a song from the South. And well, hey, I mean, if it's Lotta's way of honoring, the the veterans of the South, there's nothing wrong with that. I think in the context of this story. But here again, I wish they had set that up, where she would have this dilemma all throughout the movie on, I love him, but he's a Southern man. And, I want to honor him as much as I want to honor the North. So she does this compromise right here. But of course, the audience, is jeering. They cannot stand it. And, of course, that's when Dennis Day comes out to resolve the situation. But here again, I mean, when I first saw this, I was thinking, I don't know about this. And when I read that whole portion in this book, I was thinking, oh yeah, Lotta Crabtree would never have done anything like this. But here again, I would have been all right had they set this up. But they don't. But in terms of the movie, it works fine. I mean, this is not what the real Lotta Crabtree would have done. It just, she never would have done this. But I can't get angry at Mitzi Gaynor's performance. That's the thing. I cannot get mad at her performance. And, I mean, whatever research she might have done in preparation for this role, it wouldn't have mattered because, the script was not going to be changed for authenticity for any reason. I mean, we have an audience to deliver to and we got box office to think about, even though Lotta Crabtree's life was obviously much more colorful than what we see here in this film. So in her later years, she did a lot of investments, she did a lot of, horse racing and everything. But here again, she was a philanthropist her entire life, and she was very, very generous. And like I said, the other novel that I read, the one that I showed you earlier, Living in the Stars Light, it really showed how much she had a heart for other people, especially ones that were poor. And, and that's the thing. She was very, very helpful towards those people all throughout her life. After Lotta returned to Massachusetts, war broke out among European nations. This is 1914. Americans were divided about whether or not their country should help their allies in the battle. The actress wrote letters to newspapers pointing out that men would die, leaving widows and orphans. The United States entered the First World War in the spring of 1917, and like most Americans, Lotta supported the war effort. As Lotta aged, she painted pictures of herself in her performance costumes and exhibited her work at an art gallery. In the summertime, she painted by the shores of the Atlantic Ocean as seagulls soared in the salty air. At her seaside hotel, she dressed in old-fashioned clothes and dined alone. She ended the day rocking silently in her porch chair. Lotta's brother Jack met with her at the Brewster in Boston in 1918. He returned to North Carolina and died 2 years later. From then on, Lotta rarely left the hotel. Friends visited, and sometimes one would take her for a drive. Lotta died on September 25th, 1924, in the Brewster Hotel at the age of 76. She was buried next to her mother in New York City. Lotta never married and had no heirs. She left a $4 million estate to charity. That's over $76 million in today's money. In her will, she set aside $2 million for disabled, sick, and wounded veterans of the First World War and their dependents. Lotta said that they were, quote, the noblest and most deserving to receive her money. The Star also provided funds for animals, the education of young women in the theater, needy actors and actresses, agriculture and music students, hospitals, and former convicts. Her gifts continue to help animals and people today. Charity, said Lotta, is what is needed in this world. Growing up in gold country, Lotta developed a pioneer spirit. For her whole career, she battled stage fright every time she performed. She broke theater traditions and inspired young girls and women to play the banjo. When only men were comics, she dared to perform comedy and stood as a model for future female entertainers. She was America's first comedienne. Lotta's acting, banjo playing, dancing humor, and singing brightened stages like glittering gold dust. With a twinkle in her eye, Fairy Tale Lotta created fun and invited everyone to the good time, saying, "It is delightful to make people laugh." Thank you very much, Lois V. Harris, for putting out this book. Putting out this book about Lotta Crabtree, and of course Steve Lindahl for putting out this novel as well. Which here again, while fictional, it has a very interesting view of Lotta Crabtree from the viewpoint of a fictional character. But anyway, so Golden Girl basically ends with Mitzi as Lotta Crabtree being reunited with her beloved Southern gentleman played by Dale Robertson. And like I said, as I read that last paragraph in the book, you just wish what could have been. But for what it is, it's okay. Here again, we get to see Mitzi Gaynor do some wonderful numbers. There are the song credits right there. So, look, this is not one of my favorite Mitzi Gaynor movies by any stretch, but at the very, very least, I think in spirit, it does honor Lotta Crabtree in its own small way. I just wish that it included a lot more about her life, her banjo playing, her philanthropy, all that stuff. Instead, we get her moping about Dale Robertson. Here again, it's an okay little movie that I think is worth seeing for Mitzi Gaynor. But if you're a Lotta Crabtree fan, just be warned. Just be warned. So, at any rate, so that's Golden Girl. Thank you very much for joining me. My next commentary should be the I Don't Care Girl, which will be very, very soon. Thank you very much for joining me.